morning and welcome. Thank you for being with us today. I'd like to start with a very simple introduction, your name, where you come from, and if you belong to any generation, you feel like you belong to any generation.
Thank you, first of all, for having me. So my name is Linda Freiner. I'm Group Head of Sustainability for the Zurich Insurance Group. I'm originally from Sweden, but been in Switzerland now for 14 years. I've also become Swiss on the way.
Congratulations.
In terms of generation, I am the old millennial generation. And I think that shows in a way that we're kind of a bit in between the currently leadership generation in companies and then the next generation of wanting change. And somehow we will be the change makers trying to really be the diplomat in this and trying to make change happen. So that's what I've observed right now.
That's great. You say you were born in Sweden. What do you miss about home country compared to Switzerland?
Not a lot, actually. I'm from the very north of Sweden, so I definitely don't miss the climate. What I might miss is really the light summer nights when the sun doesn't go down.
That's unique, indeed. What about your life beyond work? Can you tell us anything about you?
Well, there is a clear reason why I moved to Switzerland in the first place, and that's mountains. So I really love going up, running in the mountains, ski touring, climbing, just being outdoors. The nature plays a very, very important part of my life, and I think that's also part of why I do this job, is that I truly care about nature, and I think nature is extremely important to the human being, and we should do everything we can to really protect nature, because that's currently really what we're not doing. So we need to step up our efforts.
And do you find the time to take care of yourself, to take care of the nature, to take care of your family and your job? What's the superpower here?
I think that the superpower is being tenacious, and really, I used to be an ultramarathon runner. So I used to be out running for 100 kilometers in the mountains and just kept going and going. And of course, I have now two small kids, so I'm not able to really do that anymore. But I really think it plays out also in my job, that I'm not the one to give up. I keep on running, both because I'm passionate about it, but also because I see the change that I can actually achieve in my job. So what I try to do is work hard, play hard during the week, and then in the weekends, I truly enjoy being with family and going up in the mountains or staying around the lake of Zurich and enjoying life.
And so in your job, it's all centered around sustainability. What is this? This word is today on everybody's desk. I had yesterday my little daughter, she's 10, she did a presentation in front of the class. Her presentation was about climate, and then most CEO probably right now on their desk, they have something related to sustainability they need to tackle and challenge. What is your own definition or way to frame the word sustainability?
Well, I came into this space, truly believing that corporations have a larger role to play in society than just to deliver shareholder value. So I really believe that taking a stakeholder approach is key for any organization. And the fact that we have to do business today in a way that safeguards the future of both the company and of society. So it's taking that long-term approach to doing business. That is really what captures me. To say this is not just for this quarter or this for this year. We have to think beyond the 3, 5. We have to think 10, 20, 30. I think that's something that is very new for companies to do, because they're used to the pressure of investors, and they're used to really produce every quarter, every year. So that's a complete mind shift change that needs to happen in society.
It's a very fascinating topic, because it looks at sustainability from a systemic perspective, thinking of different economic paradigms as well. And one might argue that some of the most successful companies, in order to secure their future, they could take a very different approach. They could take a predatory approach and say, I am big enough to become resilient to anything in the future. And instead, we're trying to ask them to embrace the paradigm of sustainability, where becoming the most important company also means respecting and not only respecting, embracing all different kind of capitals. Do you think there is a risk that a lot of big companies actually will take the predatory type of approach?
I don't think they can get away with it anymore. I think we talk a lot about stakeholder capitalism, and I think we're actually slowly moving there because investors are moving there. So oftentimes the predator companies, they have been able to get capital even doing whatever they've been doing. But I think we're seeing that changing. So actually, as the stakeholder capitalism notion is broadening to all the different communities, that will impact the companies as well. Yes, we talk about investor, but also customer is king. And to exist as a company, you need to have a customer. And what we're also clearly seeing is that customer patterns and customer sentiments are changing. So now the companies are getting, their investors are telling them to care about this, their customers are telling that, and their employees are telling that. I mean, we see that some of the predators that we might hang out in the press a lot at the moment, they're struggling to recruit people to actually work for them. So if you go stakeholder group by stakeholder group, you will see that actually companies cannot get away anymore. And then they actually need to seriously think about how they manage these long-term issues that are actually having an impact on them, but also that they have an impact on.
And I want to say a little bit on this because I think it's really fascinating. And on the topic of stakeholder capitalism, I have a lot of conversation with colleagues and with other partners from the industry. And one of those recently told me, stakeholders have always been there. We had NGOs 20 years ago. We had customers. We had investors. And it has always been about making sure that we manage them. And of course, in the past, we had to manage certain things about them. And today we have to manage other things about them. But we manage them. And he was really doing like with that arm, like there's still the distance. I sense in what you're saying that the paradigm that we are embracing is not managing the stakeholders, but actually collaborating and bring them on board on our strategy, on how to do things better. Is that so? And what it takes actually to make that switch, because that is the big switch.
It is the big, that's the transformation that we often talk about. Well, I think what has changed, yes, we've always managed the stakeholders, but the issues that we are facing is just accelerating and they're becoming much, much more challenging for everyone. And if we look at climate change, I mean, no actor can solve climate change alone. Companies will be impacted by climate change whether they want it or not. So the importance now is to be able to manage that risk and to be able to respond to a stakeholder in a way of saying, how do you actually manage that risk? And I think also the digitalization of society has also provided more and more knowledge to a company's stakeholders. So the stakeholders are much, much more informed than they used to be. And that, of course, makes it harder to just the manage approach. We see that with investors. I mean, the questions we get today compared to just 2-3 years ago are much, much more granular. They're much, much more strategic and much, much more challenging for us to really respond to. And that is a good challenge for us because that means that we have to step up our efforts and we have to be very transparent and clear about what our journey is about. So I think companies who are trying to just manage, it might work for a couple of years, but truly, I mean, we see that the business models are starting to transform and that industry is starting to transform because of the fact that these external threats are just becoming so imminent that you can't just manage them anymore.
And the chief sustainability officer, which is another funny anecdote, the chief sustainability officer of a large healthcare system once told me, this is the most amazing job which we all hope will disappear in 10 years, which means the world doesn't need a chief sustainability officer anymore. And of course, I was like, well, that's not the best way to attract the best talents to the job. Let's hope that we will need, in a way, this role, not simply because there's so much in this role that can be done. And I want to explore a little bit about the role with you. How do you see your own evolution from a previous role that you had into today, what's becoming now with different names, perhaps it can be Chief Sustainability Officer or
Chief ESG Officer
or similar. How do you see the evolution of the role, and where is the role today? And maybe if you think of the role in 2, 3, 5 years, where is it going, the role itself?
So when I took over this role, it was head of corporate responsibility. And Zurich was clearly on a journey. It had had its first cycle of a corporate responsibility strategy that was very much about managing its own ESG issues. So putting in place a diversity and inclusion strategy into the people strategy, start measuring the carbon footprint, start looking at responsible investments and the supply chain and so on. But it was very much, okay, let's manage our own ESG risks. It wasn't really touching upon the core of business, which is the insurance business. So when I took over this role, it was truly an opportunity to say, well, actually, yes, this is all good and nice to be a responsible business, but are we actually creating any change? Are we making any difference? So the role that I turned into was really to say, okay, we have to move away from corporate responsibility of just doing good and managing to really look at, okay, so how do we transform businesses and how do we transform our industry? And that's where the sustainability perspective also became important, because I said, this is also long-term. We're in it for the long term. We've been around for 150 years, but what took us here is not going to take us any further. But it took quite some time to really get everyone on board on the executive committee and really truly deciding, okay, what is our definition of sustainability and what are the topics that we should be focusing on and how moving forward. But actually, once we started that journey and we started to look at 3 issues, which happened to be an environmental, social, and a governance issue, it was truly clear to say, okay, yes, this is not something separate from the business. This is actually how we do business. So similar to digitalization, innovation, customer focus, sustainability is becoming a how we do business. It's not so much a what. And ESG is more kind of the what, and every company will choose what are the material issues that the company can really drive change in. So I think similar to a group strategy officer, a group sustainability officer will have to be around, but it would never meant, and it should never be a big department of 20, 30 people doing sustainability in the company, because sustainability needs to sit in every function, in every business, and needs to be driven from the bottom up. And
so, Linda, I want to play a little game with you. Let's see if it works. But I think these days, great chief sustainability officers like you, and when I say this, I mean it also that we see more and more women taking the role of chief sustainability officer, which I think it's a great plus. And why do I say that? Because I think there's a lot of coaching other people in their roles that is needed as well as a CSO. So for instance, if I now ask you, back to the game, if I ask you, you're having now a very difficult conversation with you, I'm sure you have the best CFO, super inspired around sustainability, but a typical CSO and CFO hard conversation. What gets in the way these days for a good, passionate and driven CSO to get across a CFO? What is harder with you? And yours is great. But
yeah, so I'm fortunate to have a great CFO who is really passionate and is driving the topic of sustainability. And so we don't have a lot of hard conversations, but if we have a conversation, it's of course around how do you measure things? How do you really show that you're creating impact? How do you ensure that you are as transparent as you possibly can to an investor? Because of course, the CFO wears the hat of looking at what are the investors looking for, but also in terms of what are we comfortable from a financial point of view of disclosing. And now as we progress, especially on a non-financial reporting, and ESG reporting in general, of course, that becomes again, okay, so what are we willing to really disclose? Where are we in the measuring? How much of a control, how robust is the system? And of course, there we have a long way to go still on the sustainability side. We do not yet have standards. I mean, we can spend the rest of the day here talking about the lack of sustainability standards and the alphabet soup there as a consequence, but really that it's still a difficult landscape to navigate. So there is not as many great black and white responses to give to a CFO as it is on the financial side. And that it's important that we see this as a journey, and that we want to get to the same place where we are in terms of financial reporting, in terms of really calculating costs and revenue from different things, but it will take a bit longer time.
Thank you for that. And that's certainly one ongoing and difficult conversation. And when I say difficult, I really don't mean confrontational. It's more about what's difficult to nail and to crack as a big challenge. But that was just the beginning of the game, because now if I ask you to imagine a difficult conversation with a chief marketing officer, so where a chief sustainability officer is trying to influence further a chief marketing officer, for example?
I think the conversations are getting more and more heated around greenwashing. So I think as a company advances on their sustainability journey and they have a great success and marketing is getting on board, they see a real opportunity in this, but how do you make sure that you're really communicating the true picture of what the company can achieve and the true picture of what the products are doing? So I think that's where the chief sustainability officer and the chief marketing officer needs to have a very close collaboration and being very open to each other in terms of what is this product actually doing? How green is it? Or how blue is it? And that it doesn't turn into more of a marketing game. I think successful companies in sustainability are successful because they manage to connect sustainability with all the different parts of the company, and marketing being an extremely important one. But as we see, as the pressure and the kind of the trends around greenwashing is increasing, the company really has to stay true to itself and say, okay, what is it that we can and cannot do through our products and services?
Last one. With the chief HR officer, are there any tougher conversation than other these days?
I think with the chief human resource officer is about what's the priority for the company. So the S in ESG is a very broad topic, and you can come at it from very different things. So is diversity and inclusion the priority? Is social equity and pay equity a priority? Is well-being a priority? Is employee experience a priority? So the chief human resource officer has a lot of different priorities. And I think for the chief sustainability officer, it's really important to help and to say, okay, let's focus in on these things. Let's really be sharp in terms of how we prioritize this and how we use it both for our own organization, but also how it translates into the business we do with our customers. Because for most companies, in the end, I mean, employees are the most important assets, and that's why we need to really be managing our employees and supporting them in the right ways. And I think the pandemic has just accelerated that for most companies.
What do you think these days is the human resources priority that we should address from a sustainability perspective?
I think equity and well-being is extremely important. I think we talked a lot about the diversity and inclusion, but in the end, it comes down to equity. Are we an inclusive company? Are we giving the same opportunities to everyone? Are we being inclusive, and are we offering a fair and sustainable workplace? But I also think that well-being is becoming more and more a key topic, and that has been accelerated by the pandemic. Because many of us are working from home, and the boundaries between home and work has completely been erased. We are connected at most times of the day, and we also have families and friends and communities to take care of on the side. So this is becoming more and more of a hard topic for many organizations.
Thank you. And as a second part of the game, which allows me one more question. If you, and I'm actually also interested to know how much Chief Sustainability Officer like you get involved, for instance, in M&A transaction and acquisitions. And these days to acquire virtuous companies or better companies that help you actually in your transformation or divest from part of the company that are not as good is indeed an important part of also the strategies of many organizations. And do you, one question is, do you contribute to that these days? Is your voice also in those part of the strategy? And in any case, if you were part of that, what suggestions would you give to companies to become more attractive, even more attractive, for instance, for a company like Zurich to be acquired in a positive way? What would you be looking for in a company?
So I think there are a couple of different pieces to this. I mean, of course, we do include ESG as a criteria when we do due diligence on the company to make sure that they're actually meeting the standards that we are expecting them to meet. But then, of course, it depends on the size of the company. You mentioned, yes, the digital. Of course, the smaller companies that we acquire, can be startups with a couple of few peoples behind it. And of course, then it's a lot about the culture. Does the culture actually fit with our culture? But then as the company grows and the bigger it becomes, of course, then you will see, well, actually, are they on a sustainability journey? Do they have the same mindset? Because in the end, it's about mindset and it's about culture a lot. So that is going to be important. And that has always been important. But of course, as a company is becoming more serious about sustainability, that has to be a match. So the conversations are very important. And also the openness of actually being able to learn from the other company and in terms of where they want to go and how they want to do. So I think it's a really an integral part of the M&A process these days, doing that.
And you mentioned a lot the ESG as a reference point. And do you make a difference between ESG and impact or not really? One is feeding the others. Impact is part of ESG. ESG is part of it. How do you see the two?
Well, I mean, ESG for me is the how. I mentioned that the what. So how sustainability is how, and ESG is really the what. What are the topics that you should focus on, right? As a company, what are the material topics to you? And they're often inputs and outputs. I think impact is something you can have an impact on an ESG topic, but impact is really taking it as further. I think we're misusing the word impact a bit these days. And how do we measure impact? I mean, it's something that is extremely difficult to really measure. It's just because, are we having a positive impact in your life just because you have chosen to drive an electric vehicle and we have chosen to offer you a good premium on your electric car insurance? Are we having a positive impact on your life? I mean, that's something that's very difficult. So I think it's important to choose. I mean, ESGs are the issues, the topics that we chose to focus on. The impact is actually what we're having at the end of the day. So they're very different for me.
They're very different. And yet, my argument would be ESG measuring that does not produce a positive impact, then we're measuring the wrong things.
Well, then we're going, is it input, output, or impact and outcome, right? So I think that's depending on what are you trying to measure. Of course, but ESG is also both risks and opportunities. So you have to manage the risks related to these ESG issues, but you also have to leverage the opportunities, and it's often the opportunities where you can have a positive impact.
The impact, yes.
Right? So I think that's important to separate. For an insurance company, we can help our clients better manage climate risk. We can help them understand where are the exposures, where can there be floods, tropical storms, or wind tornadoes. But ultimately, through that risk management, we can't have really the positive impact of what they will do with the products and the impact they will have. So that's a different story.
I want to talk a little bit about the industry where you operate. And first of all, I just want to make sure I don't make a mistake. Is it correct to say that you are broadly and mostly on the insurance industry? And then how do you see the status of the industry as a whole when it comes to the challenges of, we have the Sustainable Development Goals that, according to the plans, are supposed to be solved by 2030. We have a net zero ambitions that have some 2030 deadlines, a lot of 2050 deadlines. But if we take the 2030 and we embrace what the UN has called the decade of action, which now is only 8 years left between 2020 and 2030, how do you see the insurance industry? What should happen? What's the status today? What should happen in terms of accelerated change in the coming years to hope to get close to the objective of solving the SDG in 2030?
Yeah, so insurance have basically two levers. It has the insurance products, the risk transfer, risk management advice, and then it has its investments. So it's actually two sides of our balance sheet that we can use to drive impact. And I think we have been very good at driving impact through our investments. And we are a co-funding member of the UN Asset Owners Alliance, and who has come out with clear net zero 2050 and interim target protocols, and that is really moving. I think the investment industry and the investment side of our business is probably 5 years ahead of the insurance industry, who are just coming together to create the Net Zero Insurance Alliance and starting to look at how do we measure the carbon footprint of an underwriting portfolio, how do you set targets and so on. But we can move with both those levers, and that's how we create change. We have the power to influence and incentivize, encourage our customers to make more sustainable choices and be a part of their transition journey. And we can use our investments to do the same. In the companies we invest, we can try to really drive change, and we can invest both in terms of driving a company and in their transition journey. We can also make impact investments, so we can actually dedicate some of our fundings into projects that have a direct impact and a positive one on society. It might sound a bit controversial, but I find that the SDGs has been very hard to position in a business environment. The SDGs are an amazing framework to really try to cover from a development perspective what are the topics that we need to prioritize. And yes, we set ourselves a really, really tough deadline. But I think from a business perspective, it's really hard to say, well, I'm contributing to this SDG. I have made impact there and this. I think you have to look at, okay, what's our type of business? Where are we driving? And be very specific about that. So for our own sake, it's clearly climate change. It's really clearly helping communities to become more resilient. And of course, it's clearly around improving health and well-being. So I think that's where companies can play with. But this kind of puzzle of trying to say I am contributing to every SDG, and that is something I've been a bit.
Can be.
It's not overwhelming, but I don't think it's true. I don't think you make yourself justice if you say that you're contributing to all the SDGs. So I think from a business perspective, we need to work together with governments and really help driving the priorities of the governments and our own priorities, and make that collaboration go hand in hand. I think from a UN and government perspective, I think we've been much more successful in aligning and driving company action around the SDGs than we were with the Millennium Development Goals, right? So we've come a far way, but I think there's almost too many for businesses to really be able to say, okay, this is where we can drive a difference, and maybe feeling the expectations that we have to contribute to all of them. And actually, instead of taking a material approach of saying, where can we have the biggest impact?
No, and that's, I mean, what you mentioned as an industry and as a company are clearly also some of the Sustainable Development Goals. So like you said, it's about priority. And if my business does not have an impact in improving the hunger situation around the world, because I in my operation, I do not intercept or in that, that's not a sin. Quite the opposite. I think but it's great to have in general to have the compass that remind us, okay, this is what the words need. Yeah. Where and in your business, are you either positively or negatively contributing to any of these, or some of them you're not even intercepting, like you said? Yeah. Hopefully. I think there has been a risk in what you said in companies cherry picking SDGs and say we are and trying to force that narrative we are contributing to all of these and forgetting perhaps to say where the negative impact is and how actually to work on that part as well. And so back to the insurance industry. Where is if you had to think of the framework of the SDGs or in general sustainability, what's mostly challenging these days? Where are you finding the biggest challenge to crack from an insurance point of view? I'm almost thinking if you had to insure, if your client was Planet Earth, and you have to insure Planet Earth, and it has all this. It has water, it has hunger, it has a land fertility, it has well-being of the people in society. Which one would give you the biggest headache right now? Climate change.
I think we have challenges across the board. So it's hard to kind of point out one. I think the one that has a direct impact on our business is, of course, climate change, right? So we already have climate change on our balance sheets in terms of catastrophic risk. When we insure properties, then we take there's a climate risk involved in that. So that's the direct impact that we already feel. I mean, the storms we saw last summer had a huge impact on the insurance industry. But we focused on a lot of the physical risk side. I think what's hard for us to crack is the transition risk, right? Yes, we focused a lot oftentimes on the big commercial customers and how are they transitioning? Are we insuring fossil fuels or are we insuring the predators that you mentioned? But actually for us, the biggest challenge, how do we have a positive impact on people's lives, your life, my life? Because of course, we're also big retail insurance. So we insure a lot of private people. And how can we really incentivize? How can we encourage? What is the type of products and services that we can offer so that people will make more sustainable choices in terms of the house that they chose to build, that they isolate it well so it consumes less energy, the car I mentioned, if you chose to drive an electric vehicle. So there's a lot of that I think is hard for us to say. How much can we actually influence your choices, and how can we encourage you to make more sustainable ones? I think there are, of course, a number of social issues that we often take about. The protection gap is, of course, a very big topic in the insurance industry, and how can we make the risks that are not insurable in the future. And there, of course, the collaboration with governments are extremely important to try to get people up to a living standard where they can actually afford insurance, and where we can actually offer insurance, where we can understand the risk and fully manage that. So I'd say climate change and the protection gap is something that is the biggest challenges for our industry.
Do you think we will get to things like natural capital, putting natural assets into balance sheets or insuring natural assets? Do you see that coming in the future?
Yeah, absolutely.
Near future?
I think we're already seeing, of course, there's been a lot of kind of pilot projects around coral reef insurance and, mangroves and protecting. I think we will see more and more of that. But I think at this stage, it's still on a kind of an exploratory and piloting perspective. But absolutely, we'll see more of that, because we can use nature to help protecting us. In the way that we've been storing nature, we can also help it rebuild it back and help us protecting us.
I would talk to you the whole day, because there's so much nice information, but I also want to try to take us to some sort of conclusion. And one question that I really want to ask before we get there is, I don't know about you, but for me, almost regularly, one day I wake up and the world is all dark and difficult when I think of sustainability. Another day I wake up and I am the most energized people and I feel so optimistic. And those days when you see it very dark, and what's worrying you about the world and sustainability?
It's really what's the world that we leave behind to our children and grandchildren. When I read to my oldest son, who's 5 years old, in the children's stories today, they're talking about climate change. And I'm getting tears in my eyes when I read to him and I think about, we are creating this mess that they are going to have to take on. And yes, the children in Switzerland might be able to do that well, but there are millions and millions of children around the world that will not have a chance against climate change. So that really makes me, tears in my eyes even now when I think about it. But the alternative of doing nothing is not the answer for me. Even if I can have a tiny, tiny, tiny little impact, I will go for that compared to doing nothing. So that's really what gets me, what keeps me going.
Which was the second part of my question. So that's the kind of knowing that even taking small steps does create an impact. Is that what gets you going? Is there anything else that gets you, those days where you see, we're actually going to make it. We are going to crack this. And my children will also see millions of butterflies. We'll see the wind. We'll see the seasons. We'll see, and my grandchildren will continue to see that. What is there in those days? What are you thinking of? Why would you be so optimistic?
Well, I get very optimistic from conversations I have with our customers. When I have conversations with big multinationals who are on a transition journey, and I see how they're completely transforming their industry, I'm just at awe, because this is exactly what we need. And also the ones that are brave and to say, we are betting on the future. Yeah, we don't have all the answers today, but we need to bet on the future. So that really gets me energized. But what also gets me energized is having conversations with employees who colleagues of mine who come to me and it's like, I want to talk sustainability. I want to find out more about what we're doing, how I can contribute. The energy and the passion and the commitment that sits with most people today of actually wanting to change, of seeing a problem and wanting to be part of the change, that also energized me a lot.
Thank you. 2022 is just behind the corner, and somebody has that good tradition of putting good intents at the beginning of the year. So if you had to think of something that a personal behavior or something related to sustainability in your life that you really want to get even better in 2022, something about your company, Zurich, and something about the world in general, 3 actions.
So first, me personally, I think consumption is the big hidden sustainability issue that we don't talk more openly about. When we look at, I think the retail clothing industry stands for something around 4 to 6% of total annual emissions, and that most people people actually don't use 40% of the clothes that they buy. And that I find is just absolutely, mind-boggling about why do we not talk about this more openly. So I think for me, my personal, this is next year is really about consumption and really choosing the circular economy choices and really trying to be more conscious around that. I'm not a materialistic person. I don't like to have a lot of stuff around me. But I still, just for convenience, often, buy something because it's convenient than actually going and spending with more time of finding something that is more sustainable. For our company, I think it's really now to accelerate our net zero journey from an underwriting perspective of really setting the targets, really understanding fully what we have in our portfolios and how we can drive change in the world. And as for society, I truly hope that sustainability becomes more of a topic on the political agenda. I think it goes in waves. Now it's been a lot because of COP26, and then we tend to forget about it. So I really hope it becomes a topic, and that people are actually starting to vote, also use their power of vote, and And that's something we don't see in a lot of countries yet. And I think that's going to be, if we truly want to change society, then we're going to have to change that in the way that we vote as well.
Is there anything we haven't covered and you would like to add?
I think we covered the most. I think in terms of the future of the chief sustainability officers, I really think that it's going to be around. But I think the change that we didn't maybe is that we're going to get more and more people into the organizations that have studied sustainability, that really wants to be driving. So there's going to be an enormous entrepreneurship movement around this. And we are already starting to see that in our own company. People come in and they say, well, I've actually chosen to work for you because I see that you're having a strong sustainability commitment and ambition, and I want to be part of that journey. So I think that's a change we're going to see as well. So the entrepreneurship around it is going to be much, much more bigger than it is today. So it's much less top driven in terms of this is what we have decided that we're going to do. Now people go and do it. There's going to be much, much more of this is what we want to do. Leadership, come and do it with us.
And I love this part in Deloitte and in my role. I think I started to account for that, but I end up spending, and I'm so happy about it, already between an hour or two per day, simply answering to calls of my colleagues that just need a quick, I have this challenge. I want to hear how you're thinking about that. And so this idea that sustainability is getting through every single things and the chief sustainability officer in the future can actually become a massive coach for the whole organization is fascinating as a thought. Do you have a question for me? By any chance, but not that you have to. Are we okay?
Yeah, I think we have covered some really, really great questions. And I think I really appreciate you bringing that academic perspective as well, because I think that's what I see changing. When I went to business school once upon a time, the topic of sustainability didn't really exist. I wanted to write my master thesis around the collaboration between a bank and civil society. And they were different organizations, and they would, go and write the thesis with this NGO professor. He's a professor on NGOs. And I said, but then that's not what I'm wanting. I'm talking about the business here. And I think there's this tremendous change that has happened. And I also hope to see more and more chief sustainability officers going into academia and later in their careers to really share with their experiences and how to help driving this. So I'm really excited about that.
I think that as an offer for you to go to some of the universities. I collaborate personally, but in general, I completely agree with that. And it is indeed important to what you open up. Maybe we can also use this as an appeal to all the business school and not to treat sustainability as we had 30 years ago, the topic of ethics. And then ethics became a module of, a program with 50 modules, and ethics being one little module out there, without understanding that ethics is something that should have been looked at across the whole curriculum. And sustainability, there's always a risk that is also somewhere when it is treated as one course down there, instead of becoming embedded in every part. And one of the biggest gap in business school these days is the course on system thinking. Business leaders are a little bit behind, and sustainability is a systemic topic, and we don't have
it's a complicated topic, so of course we shy away a bit from it.
Well, we shouldn't in the future.
Like impact, it's a complicated topic. We should not shy away from it.
Well, Linda, thank you so much for coming to our offices today for this great conversation. We look forward to staying engaged with you and with other CSOs during 2022. Our own 2022 objective, as far as this initiative is concerned, is not only to hear amazing testimonies from you and other CSOs, but also to strengthen the community of CSOs globally and to create and leverage on this incredible people behind these roles in the future. So thank you so much again, and we hope to stay engaged again in the future, Linda.
Thank you so much for having me and for inviting me to talk about this really, really big topic that I'm so passionate about. So thank you.
Wonderful.